Open University.
Hey class, you catch me in my den. This is my cube where I sit in gloom. Light-wise it's gloom, but it's not emotionally gloom. It's actually a place of great security, a womb really, rather than a gloom. I sit here and I incubate ideas. It's my incubating space. And today I wanted to talk about some of the ideas that I market and sell as a cultural journalist, because I don't just make my money from being a musician. So how do you become a cultural journalist? How do you make money in magazines, from websites, writing about culture? And I would say the key to that is reading. And I don't just mean reading exciting books like this, my latest acquisition from one of my favorite secondhand bookshops here. This is Plume by Henri Michaud. Plume is a strange character, a kind of stand-in for the poet himself, perhaps. Plume au restaurant, Plume in the restaurant. Plume déjeuner au restaurant. Quand le maître d'hôtel s'approcha, le regarda sévèrement. On lui dit d'une voix basse et mystérieuse, ce que vous avez là dans votre assiette ne figure pas sur la carte. Plume was eating in a restaurant when the maitre d' approached and looked severely at him, saying with a mysterious and low voice, "What you have on your plate is not on the menu." There's an intriguing beginning of a little poetic tale, a prose poem by Henri Michaud. This kind of book, though, is not the reading I'm talking about. If you want to be a cultural journalist, you have to read culture itself as if it were a book, open or closed, preferably closed, because then if you can tease out whatever meanings are interesting and pleasant to read, or confirm your prejudices or the reader's prejudices, all to the good. The best kind of journalist is a journalist of connotations rather than denotations, because denotations is all about fact-checking. There is one right answer generally in a text of denotation, and that would be a sort of academic text in a science field which has, considered to have at least one right answer to things. Connotations. Okay, we have to talk about Saussure. I am of the generation which sort of discovered, slightly belatedly, structuralism. Structuralism, which begins in various French academies in the 1960s, mostly anthropological departments. People like Claude Lévi-Strauss start saying that we can look at tribal structure, for instance, as we look at linguistic structure. It's grammatical. Your family relations, your relations of kinship and of servitude and of obligation are like the kind of sets of words and the way words are allowed to interact in sentences. So you have paradigms and syntagms. Paradigms are items which are all interchangeable, or which are all kind of ranged according to their qualities, their particular uses. Syntagm is the way you fit those different types of words together in a sentence to make a meaning. But let's go to Saussure. All this begins with Saussure in the late 19th century giving his Cours Général Linguistique, his general course in linguistics. And Saussure simply sat down and said, how does language work? It's a system of signs. And signs, and I haven't refreshed my memory since my student days. I'm just giving you a kind of reheated splurge of Saussure here. But basically the sign is broken up into the signifier and the signified. And the relationship between signifier and signified is arbitrary. That's very important, because it kind of makes you always keep in mind that language is just a set of conventions by which we try to label, denote, pin down a reality which is always evanescent, is always kind of escaping from us, and is always finally indescribable. And of course, enormous numbers of writers, modernist and experimental writers, especially in the 20th century, made it their life's work to show the impossibility, but also the desirability of pinning things down. If you think of Finnegan's Wake or something like that, James Joyce, this is a great effort for the 20th century to really reconcile itself to that understanding of the indescribability of experience, and yet the worthwhileness of trying. So it's actually a saving grace, I would say, of language, that we can never speak definitively of anything. And there's always this margin of error, and which becomes a feverish margin of speculation. And this is where the cultural journalist, especially someone who specializes in, for instance, writing about something rather ineffable and exotic like Japan for non-Japanese, or writing about the future for people living in the present, things like Japan and the future are so kind of cloudy and misty and open to many interpretations. They're polysemous, in the words of Roland Barthes, that you can indulge yourself in a certain amount of pretentious and feverish speculation, almost druggy. It's almost druggy to talk about the future. Obviously, if I'm a futurologist or an Orientalist Japanologist, or something I also do, I'm a Bowieologist, I can feverishly speculate, especially say the last 10 years of Bowie, when he didn't talk about his own work and didn't talk about his life, and all we have is speculation, really, until somebody, Coco Schwab, his personal assistant, releases the book, which she's obviously never going to release because she is the ultimate loyal personal assistant. All Bowie's secrets will go to the grave with Coco Schwab. We are free as Bowieologists to freewheel, to speculate, to brainstorm, and this is, for instance, the greatest theorist of our time probably is Zizek, Slavoj Zizek, who is a Lacanian. And Jacques Lacan, at about the same time that Claude Lévi-Strauss was coming up with this idea of the grammatical structure of tribes and things, Lacan was coming up with the idea of a way to read Freud. He's reading a text, but also he's reading family relationships, mental processes, society itself, in ways which are almost, you would say, against the grain. And he's doing it with a sort of relishing the perversity of his own speculations and his own interpretations, saying, for instance, that woman does not exist. Wow, woman does not exist. I mean, how can you say that? But, it makes you then go to a close-grained reading of what it means to be a woman, how you become a woman, how you might become an artificial woman, all sorts of things, and whether there is really, looking at definitions themselves, when you have man, woman, you have these binary definitions, and one of them is always the dominant term in these binaries. It's very difficult to find a binary in which one is not somehow dominant and the other subdominant, submissive, passive in some ways. So how do we assign those binaries, and how do we even justify the existence of the opposite, of the subdominant, the underclass, if you're talking politically? So anyway, yes, so Roland Barthes, okay, the key text for anybody who wants to be a cultural journalist is Roland Barthes' Mythologies, which came out in, I think, 1957, and which was a compilation of his essays and articles for the Paris Match. And he would write about things like the design of the new Citroën, and compare it to, Rouen Cathedral or Chartres Cathedral, and say that the 20th century, our equivalent in the design process to those nameless architects and builders who labored for centuries to make a new cathedral is something like the new Citroën, or how the haircuts in Ben-Hur actually speak more of the 1950s than they do of the Roman period that they're supposedly set in. What are his other famous texts there? I haven't read it for a long time. I think Barthes' career is very fascinating, and it was something you could. When I was young, the NME was actually very beholden to Roland Barthes, and so I was reading about him not just I was reading about him for my sociology course, for my literature course, but also in the weekly music press. So people like Ian Penman and Paul Morley were very influenced by Barthes. And Barthes' career goes from very Marxist and pseudo-scientific texts like Système de la Mode. He wrote a book about fashion called The System of Fashion. And then he did these very close readings of texts like Balzac's Sarracine, the book called S/Z. Actually, there's a copy of it, and I'm not going to even tell you which bookshop, but a bookshop which I frequent, which I haven't yet plucked up the courage to buy, but I might buy it. SZ in the collection Tel Quel. And Barthes developed from this kind of pseudoscientific and psychoanalysis-influenced approach to an emphasis on pleasure. He died tragically young. He was hit by a laundry van in Paris. He was obviously daydreaming when he crossed the road, and this laundry van killed him. But he had made this inaugural lecture for the Collège de France in 1977, which stressed pleasure. And he increasingly wrote about photographs and about the pleasure to be derived from text. He's very key in this idea of the death of the author. We shouldn't look at authors or their intentions. We should look at texts as a kind of, and also polysemous texts, which, I mean, you could say anticipated the web in the sense that he looks at the way that all texts kind of reflect and work together with all other texts. And it's not a question of either the individual author or an individual text, which is so important. It's the way that those texts all work with each other, almost a sort of conspiracy theory, or a kind of tapestry weaving theory, or a web theory of text, which was important for a while anyway. But I think later Barthes gets a bit more conservative and a bit more interested in his own sensual pleasure and jouissance, as he would have called it. The jouissance, which is a kind of ambiguous word which can mean playfulness but also orgasm. And that there's a kind of, he made a distinction between the écrivain and the écriveur, I think it is. And the écriveur, the writer, is the standard word for writing, but the écrivain is someone who's much more ludic and playful and even orgasmic in his delight in the pure formalist play of language with itself. And so again, you would cite James Joyce, but maybe also someone like Georges Perec as someone playing with the formal restraints of language, actually restraining himself almost as a masochist would ask to be restrained with handcuffs or ropes or something. You know, it's almost a delight in the inadequacies of language and its restrictions. So, but also just a sensual delight in looking and reading. So, I mean, why am I talking about all these French theorists when I'm telling you how to become a cultural journalist? The reason is that almost every piece of cultural journalism you read now is a kind of diluted 10th generation version of what these people were doing when they applied psychoanalysis and grammar, linguistics to everything, to the reading not just of text but of society itself. So this gives you great freedom, and it's very fruitful. Not just someone like Zizek, but just anybody who's writing any text for an art magazine or a cultural magazine of any kind, doing an art review, for instance. You're going to be drawing on these ideas of just the very liberating idea that society can be read, and that other things, you know, it's also part of postmodernism's collapse of the categories of high and low culture, that you can read popular culture in just as intelligent a way as you would reserve for your readings of supposedly great works of art. So people would go off and read Batman comics as if they were Proust, you know. This, you could say, is sort of the one of the negative aspects of this idea that everything is readable, everything is legible, is the idea that, especially in Britain, countries like Britain, which have this rather quisling, I think, relationship with popular culture, which is that they hate their intellectuals, they hate pretension, and therefore anyone who's an intellectual, anyone with a postgrad degree, especially in the humanities, has to, almost as a kind of act of penance, and to show that they're not a puffy, pretentious, cosmopolitan, francophile theorist, they have to apply their, and maybe someone like Charlie Brooker is it Charlie Brooker or Charlie Brooker? Charlie Brooker is reading popular culture in his Screen Wipe series, for instance, with all the equipment of a very good, grad student, as if it mattered, as if it were put together by intelligent people. And in Britain, of course, it is, because popular culture, so-called popular culture, has been designed by Oxbridge people, graduates of the best universities, who decide to dedicate themselves to down-market things. I mean, I'm probably an example as well. I'm a graduate with a very good degree, an English literature degree, and I decided to go into pop music. Kind of failed because there aren't enough intelligent people to appreciate what's going on in my songs, I like to think. But I think it's a uniquely British thing. I mean, I don't really see this around me in Japan. I don't see a lot of very intelligent people analyzing popular culture. On the other hand, the Japanese have never had this high art, low art divide that we have in the West, and I think they put a lot of care into, handmade things, pottery or animation or manga, whatever. Those things don't have they don't quite have the class system that we have, and therefore there isn't the stigma attached to supposedly down market things. I'm considering writing I've got various publishing proposals on the table just now, and I'm considering doing something a bit like a detective. I mean, it sounds like the biggest cliche in the world, but doing something slightly new with the detective format, because I am interested in detectives from Sherlock Holmes to Paul Temple. And I'm interested in Anyway, I shouldn't talk about it. I'll jinx it if I talk about it. Yeah, I think anything obviously can be read, and all you have to do... I find if I need to sit down and write a cultural piece for somebody, for an art magazine or somebody like that, I just have to wash the dishes. This is also very important. Have a bath. Don't take your laptop into the bath with you because you'll die. No, I often take an iPhone or an iPad into the bath with me because that's safe, and they're even waterproof now. But don't do that, because if you're just in a place like a bath, which is like a womb, you're incubating new ideas, and or wash the dishes or do the laundry, and an idea will come to you, and then that'll be followed by 10 ideas. If you want to make art, just start. And if you want to analyze, remember that you can read anything. You can read a door. Everything is designed. Everything has a certain intention which you can tease out. And also the unconscious, the idea of the unconscious, the idea that a country like Japan, if you're writing about that, or an artist, or a politician even, or a fashion designer, they all might have things which they're putting into their work which even they don't know about. This is part of the death of the author thing, and you do know about. So, or at least you have the right to your legitimate opinion. And if you're a good writer, you can seduce people into a kind of feverish state of speculation. That's how to be a cultural journalist in my experience. It's probably not a very good formula. You won't make a ton of money either, but actually art magazines, some of them do pay pretty well because they get a lot of advertising from galleries, so it's your way of getting the money from the galleries that you worked with, maybe, if you're occasionally an artist like me, which you were never paid for at the time because you didn't have anything to sell. Anyway, I'm rambling. How to be a cultural journalist, and kind of also be a sort of dilettante, because a cultural journalist is a kind of flaneuring through culture.
Open University.